Please leave the training area." The silver-haired old man simply stood stock still. No reaction, no defense, no argument. His gaze remained fixed on a young recruit struggling with a rifle too large for his hands. A sudden gust of wind lifted the old man's sleeve, revealing a jet-black tattoo on his left bicep, a dark spiral encircling the code E54X. The entire training yard froze. Why did this silent, anonymous old man make a SEAL commander snap to attention? And what caused the one who once saved an entire special ops team to choose decades of silence? All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a tale that will leave you speechless. Take a second to like the video and subscribe, and drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see people joining us from all corners of the globe. "Sir, please leave the training area." The rigid command rang out on a gray afternoon as the last daylight slanted through the barbed wire fence and fell upon the gaunt figure of an old man. He did not immediately react. He only gave a slight nod, as if following a long-practiced habit, then quietly took 2 steps back and stopped just inside the perimeter. His name was Henry Lawson Hank, if anyone still remembered. 68 years old, hair silver right to his scalp, his spine slightly curved, yet his steps remained steady, as though time had only slowed him, never shaken his resolve. His face bore no striking features, deep-set eyes, wind-tanned skin except for one unsettling quality: his gaze never wavered. It was fixed like a taut line upon the young recruit struggling with a sniper rifle at firing lane 4. Jason Wyatt, his foster son. Hank had shown up unannounced. No camera, no phone. Just an old flannel shirt, a sloppy gray scarf, worn-down combat boots, and a gait that suggested he had walked this ground hundreds of times before. One hand stayed in his pocket, the other clutched the edge of his coat, as if safeguarding an unspoken promise. The younger soldiers, recruits, and instructors alike began to notice him, not because he did anything unusual, but because he remained unnervingly calm in a place where no one had time to stand still. A few glances swept over him, half curiosity, half disdain. He's probably watching TikTok SEAL training clips and thinks this is real. Bet he's here to find a backdrop for his retirement poetry. A ripple of laughter snapped out quick, low, as sharp as a thin blade. No malice, but no kindness either. The familiar sound people make when they see someone who doesn't belong and want to remind him of it. Hank said nothing. He either did not hear them or had heard too much to feel compelled to answer. He did not turn, did not raise an eyebrow, did not clench his fist. He gently adjusted his scarf as a gust drifted past, then stepped a bit closer to the fence, his eyes still fixed on Jason, now fumbling with the rifle's bipod, the stock slipping from his shoulder in his unsteady stance. No one knew who he was, and no one truly cared. To them, he was simply a shadow arriving late, out of place, someone who did not belong in this scene. But to Hank, none of that mattered. He had not come to prove anything, nor to resurrect the past. He had come to fulfill a silent promise made years ago. If Jason ever chose this path, he would be there. Not to intervene. Not to stop him. But to be present. Amid the staccato crack of live rounds, the thud of boots on sand, and the heavy breaths of young men pushing their bodies toward a daring dream, Hank stood his ground. Unmoved, casting no shadow on anyone, yet refusing to vanish. His presence caused no uproar. It was more like a single off-key note in a march, prompting some to glance back, not out of curiosity, but from a vague sense that they had seen such a steady gaze somewhere else. Far away. Long ago. Yet they looked away quickly, as people often do with things they deem unimportant. And Hank, accustomed to being overlooked, simply remained an unwavering figure in a crowd that believed silence held no story. A sharp, dry crack echoed like something hard striking the ground. A Barrett M107, the heaviest sniper rifle in the training sequence, had just slipped from the recruit's grasp and clattered onto the rough earth, bouncing and tilting as if it, too, were stunned by its keeper's clumsiness. The recruit who'd dropped it was the red-brown-haired youth, barely scarred, his hands still trembling by instinct as they'd touched the weapon that stood as a symbol of power. He froze, staring at the rifle as though it had betrayed him, while the other trainees exchanged glances, brows knitting not at the fall itself, but at the unthinkable sight unfolding before too many witnesses. No one moved forward. No instructor rushed in. Only one figure stepped onto the field: gentle, decisive Hank Lawson, the old man by the fence. He bent in a near-silent motion, hands closing around the rifle with the familiarity of hundreds of hours spent in its company. He rotated the weapon, checked the stock, re-engaged the safety, then returned it to the recruit with such precision that no one dared intervene. There were no reproaches, no orders, only the gesture of a man who understood this tool more deeply than he watched his own reflection. The recruit stammered a thank you, but Hank had already stepped back. At that moment, a dry, soft breeze lifted the left hem of his flannel, revealing a dark patch of skin on his bicep. There, in the harsh sunlight, was a simple yet razor-sharp black spiral tattoo, the code E54X, clearly inscribed, impossible to misread. Less than 10 meters away, Captain Ramirez, senior officer of the training ground, unconsciously pivoted at the sound. His eyes locked on the tattoo, as though spotting a buried mine. He paused for a heartbeat brief, but heavy, then quickly turned away as if he'd seen nothing. But Hank knew. He recognized that look. The momentary recoil, the vague shudder of someone confronting something that should not have been here. He had seen that look years ago when an intelligence officer first opened his classified dossier on the operation history called The Ghost in the Storm. No one spoke. But a sudden silence spread faster than static over a radio. The cadence of commands thinned. Instructors spoke more softly, more cautiously. Some recruits began glancing back. No one pointed or asked questions, yet every gaze now sought out the old man who had lifted a 30-pound Barrett as casually as brushing dust from it. Jason stood at firing lane 4, mid-squeeze of the trigger, when he froze. His eyes flicked around by reflex, then settled on Hank. Something had shifted, not in Hank, but in how everyone around him was looking at Hank. He didn't understand why, but his gaze and that of everyone else drifted down to the old man's left bicep. And then he saw it. The black spiral tattoo, fine, lined but sharp as a blade, surrounding a sequence of symbols no one could decode unless they'd walked through that exact kind of storm. He remained motionless, breath caught in his chest. Something vague was collapsing, not faith, but the limits of what he thought he knew about the man he'd assumed was just a benign old fellow. Jason couldn't name what it was, but he sensed that Hank had not merely been a soldier, as Hank himself had claimed, but had belonged to something beyond words. Another breath of wind stirred the flannel hem back over the tattoo, yet no one's eyes left him. And though everyone turned back to their positions, no one laughed again. In Coronado's glaring sunshine, a name not on any roster had become the center of every gaze, as simply by the mark of ink on skin. Dear viewers, please take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then stay tuned. The story still holds more surprises. Comment 1 if you're enjoying this tale, so we know you're still here. The training session ended with a short whistle. The recruits began to disperse. Some removed their goggles, others wiped sweat from their brows, and a few exhausted souls stamped their boots into the ground as a self-reassurance after the grueling drills. But no one wandered far from their positions. Something had just happened and everyone felt it. Unspoken, their gazes no longer fixed on the targets but on a single figure whose name appeared on no roster. Captain Ramirez stood for a moment before deciding to approach the old man. The afternoon breeze stirred the sparse cacti at the edge of the yard. Each of Ramirez's steps carried a tension that defied description, not reluctance for confrontation, but the keen awareness of exactly whom he was about to address. "Who are you?" Ramirez's voice was calm, yet each word struck the air like a hammer on hollow metal. "Why are you here?" Hank did not answer at once. He simply closed his eyes for a few seconds, as though retreating inward to years locked away in silence. When he opened them, his voice was deep and certain, without an ounce of regret. "I am Henry Lawson. I served in Operation Thunder Vortex in 2009. I was the one who helped rescue the entire SEAL Team Bravo in the Penasco Gorge. during the summer storm. Ramirez did not move, yet his expression shifted. His eyes, usually sharp on the drill field, softened as if pushed back by a gust from a distant past. Nearby recruits turned fully toward them. The air seemed to thicken, partly from astonishment, partly from the uneasy realization that they were witnessing something not found in any training manual. "I came to see Jason," Hank continued, his tone matter-of-fact, as though recounting an everyday errand. Jason froze at the mention of his name. He turned, bewildered not by being named, but by how everyone was looking at Hank, the man he thought he understood. Ramirez studied Hank for several more seconds, then asked slowly, "E-54X, where did you take that shot?" The question carried no hint of interrogation. It felt like a ritual, as if the asker already knew the answer, yet still needed to hear it confirmed aloud. Hank nodded, lightly, as though it had never left him. "Northeast Ridge, about 800 meters above your position. Heavy rain, crosswinds of 35 miles per hour, no standard firing angle. I had to calculate the deflection by the echo." No one spoke. The young soldiers who had joked that morning now stood frozen like statues. One instructor removed his sunglasses and squinted at the old man, as if trying to match this live scene against a half-remembered tale blurry and foreign. Ramirez clasped his hands behind his back and turned to face the yard. His eyes scanned each recruit's face, then returned to Hank. "I remember that operation," he said, his voice sounding drained. "We thought Bravo Team would never come back." Hank said nothing. The Central Command lost contact. Satellites were down. Every route was cut off. Then suddenly, 7 enemy positions disappeared one by one cleanly, swiftly, with no reports. No one saw the shooter. Ramirez's tone fell to a near whisper. "We called him the Vortex Ghost. Command never confirmed his identity. The files were sealed. No one knows whether it was real or just a fluke." Hank stood unmoving, one hand resting on the sleeve that hid his tattoo. "Not a fluke," he said. "I was there, and I did what had to be done." Ramirez studied him for a long moment. Then he tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharpening. "Why withdraw? Why refuse a medal? Why not stay in command?" That question had been asked by many and none had answers. Hank offered a faint smile, the kind of smile worn by those who have seen too much, enough to know when silence is the kindest word. Because some things should happen only once, and be carried off on the wind. Silence spread this time not from surprise, but from respect. Jason no longer turned away. He stepped closer, looking at Hank not with the eyes of a nephew, but with the eyes of someone who now understood that the greatest among us choose to live quietly, as if they were never anyone at all. The breeze still blew across Coronado's sands, lifting dust and scattered sunspecks of light. But in the hearts of all present, an ancient mark had come alivetched in bone, in flesh, in unnamed memory and, in a gaze that needed no introduction. Shortly after that training session, an urgent meeting was called. No formal schedule, no summons, no official reason, yet everyone appeared. Recruits, instructors, a few technical staff, all instinctively forming a semicircle around Captain Ramirez. No one spoke. The air hung heavy, as though ready to burst. Ramirez stood silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to the sandy range where Hank still sat alone, as if recalling an old scene playing silently in his mind. Then he turned back, his voice low but resonant like thunder in the chests of those assembled. "In 2009, he began, Bravo Team was deployed to the Penasco Gorge, ostensibly a straightforward reconnaissance mission. A breeze swept through, carrying the scent of sun-baked earth and sea salt. No one moved. Jason, too, stood among them, eyes unblinking. We were informed the extraction route was clear. Satellites confirmed no enemy activity. Everything seemed under control." Ramirez paused, swallowing hard. "But we were wrong, and that mistake nearly cost the entire team their lives." He stepped forward, hands clasped lightly behind his back. 25 minutes into position, we were ambushed. Snipers on the ridges flanking the gorge expertly concealed. Visibility dropped to near zero from heavy rain. Radio transmissions cut out. Satellites obscured by thick cloud cover. No one knew our location. No one was coming. Jason swallowed. The young soldiers around him began to grasp that they were hearing of a war not found in textbooks. We were trapped there for 6 hours, no outbound calls, no reinforcements, and one by one, each of us confronted the worst imaginable. Ramirez paused and then turned his head toward Hank, who remained sitting like an ancient stone, unmarked by time. And then, each enemy sniper on the ridges simply disappeared. 1, then 2, then 3, each shot silent and precise, as if someone were redrawing the battlefield with the world's finest pencil. He placed a hand on his chest, touching an unspoken memory. We later learned Henry Lawson, alone, no commanding officer, no orders, no intelligence, armed only with an old topographic map, binoculars, and his sniper rifle. He left his assigned position, climbed to a ridge nearly 800 meters high, in driving rain and thunder, with no safety line, no support, nothing but the storm tearing through the gorge. Captain Ramirez met each recruit's eyes, his voice roughening. From that vantage, he made 6 shots, all hits, all the enemy's most elite marksmen, each shot a single opportunity, no second chance, no corrections, no backup. And if he had missed, we wouldn't be standing here. One recruit shut his eyes, imagining that cliff, the torrential rain, the gale, and a man just over 40 at the time lying motionless, cradling his rifle like a fragile life. Ramirez lowered his voice, as though speaking not to them but to himself. At the time, we only called him the Storm Gatekeeper. No one knew his name, no one verified it, all records classified. Until today, I've finally seen him in the flesh. And he came here just to watch his foster son take his first live fire test. A long silence followed. The morning's laughter had vanished. Only the wind's whisper remained, and a heavy weight in everyone's chests as if reminded that some men stand guard at the threshold between life and death, and do it alone, in the storm without ever seeking recognition. Jason looked to Hank. He did not turn around. But somehow Jason knew Hank had heard every word, and remained true to the choice he'd made all his life. When you do what is right, you don't need applause. You just need to be there. No order had been given, no official signal sent. Yet the entire range seemed to exhale in unison as Henry Lawson, the silver-haired man whose eyes had once scanned death's mountain passes, walked slowly toward the old bleachers beneath the late-day shade. He did not seek a seat. He did not shy away from the stairs, but in every deliberate step lay the humility of someone who had stood on the brink of glory sought by many and chose to step back. The trainees, most still wearing the scent of sweat and gunpowder on their uniforms, formed silent clusters. No one dared break the hush that hung over the yard. Even the instructor accustomed to command and control remained rooted in place, as though they themselves needed a moment to grasp what they had just witnessed. Then, from among the ranks, a young female recruit stepped forward. Bronzed cheekbones, a straight back, eyes both resolute and hesitant. She walked toward the old man, neither too fast nor too slow. When she stood just a few paces away, she halted, clasped her hands, and spoke in a clear, measured voice. "Mr. Lawson, I'm sorry for judging you wrongly. I was mistaken." She did not bow her head. Yet in her gaze there was a full admission, not for reputation's sake, but because his silent presence had spoken volumes. Hank looked at her for a moment, his expression neither stern nor angry but filled with a depth of understanding, as if he'd grown used to being misunderstood. Then he nodded, very slightly, like a man who has forgiven the world in silence. "Heroes don't always wear armor," he said, his voice as soft as a whispering breeze. "Sometimes, they're just a frail old man, standing here to watch his foster son fire his first shot." His words settled over the range like a pebble dropped on a still pond, sending ripples of understanding slowly outward. Jason, the recruit whose only worry during the entire training had been not dropping his rifle, stepped close to him. At first he said nothing, merely standing by Hank's side, then suddenly reached out and grasped his hand. "You don't need a medal," Jason whispered, his voice thick, eyes reddened, though no tears fell. "You've done more than any medal could recognize." Hank did not reply. He only squeezed Jason's hand in return, a slow, weighty grip, as if that clasp carried a whole chapter of unspoken memories. Everyone around them remained still, but this silence was no longer one of shock. It was the silence of acknowledgement, a form of respect that required no words, no ceremony, just presence and attention. An older instructor cleared his throat, as if to break the atmosphere, but instead merely gave Hank a slight nod like a soldier saluting the one who guided him through the darkness, even when no one else could see. In that moment, the training yard felt like a resonant inner bell, no wind, no guns, just a gentle tremor in each person's heart. A moment when courage was no longer measured by rounds fired, but by the willingness to stand there, unnamed, and still do what is right. Perhaps that is the one lesson no training course can teach. And today, that lesson was written in a hidden tattoo on a left bicep, in the humility of a frail old man, and in eyes that never wavered even through the storm. Jason tightened his grip once more. Not out of fear of losing him, but because, for the first time in his life, he fully understood the one thing Hank never had to say. A week later, the breeze still swept across Coronado's sands as before, yet something in the air had changed. It was no longer just wind but a silent echo left behind by an unspoken event that everyone felt. Jason Wyatt, the young recruit who once struggled to hold his rifle and steady his nerves, now stood at the podium for the sniper class graduation ceremony. His shoulders were squared, his gaze steely, and when he spoke, his voice steady, unembellished, simply, resonated. I used to think strength lived in the rifle and how far you could shoot, how fast, how accurate. But after what I've been through, I realize true strength isn't in the weapon but in the choice you make when the world around you is silent. No one applauded at once. There was no need. His words so simply potent, a quiet tremor through the crowd. He didn't name names, yet everyone knew whom he meant. And, just as that man had always been present, unlisted yet unforgettable, they felt him there. After the speech, the graduates returned to formation, but no one truly shook off the sense that they carried something more precious than the certificates in their hands. In their personal training logs, usually filled with technical notes on firing angles and wind drift, a strange code began to appear, written in black ink or soft pencil, E54X. Beside it, the spiral emblem, simple, but recognizable by anyone who knew. A man had sat through the storm and saved his team, without a medal in sight. No one taught them to write it. No one demanded they remember, but they chose to record it so they would not forget. The ceremony ended like any other except for one moment no one could have foreseen. Hank Lawson was not seated in the guest section. He stood at the rear, a respectful distance from the crowd. Yet as the graduates began to file past, from the youngest recruit to those about to take their final salute, each turned in unison and fell into two silent lines flanking the walkway. No one gave the order, no one directed it. Yet it was as if the very heart of the training ground had decided. This man who had quietly stood by the fence on that first day deserved passage through an aisle of reverent silence. Hank hesitated only a moment, then stepped forward. Jason walked beside him, wordless. He was no longer just a recruit but part of something far greater. And in his eyes, no longer that of pupil to teacher, nor grandson to grandfather, was the look of someone who deeply understood what truly mattered. No applause followed, not a sound intruded, only downturned or uplifted gazes, each reflecting the private lesson they had learned from him. That silence was more beautiful than any music. And as Hank passed through the old iron gate of the range, the late sun touched his thin shoulders. Jason glanced over and saw him place a hand on his left bicep, where the E54X tattoo still lay, faded by years but never dimmed in his spirit. "Do you ever regret it?" Jason asked, softly, a question echoing from those early days when he still doubted what he did not yet understand. Hank was silent for a moment. Then he spoke as if to himself. "I don't regret doing it. I only regret that it had to be done."